My remarks today are going to focus less on the practical application of the tools that you've been learning about all day, but more about why it was worth learning them at all. My remarks are, in my opinion, and despite knowing all the competing demands, the shrinking budgets, the expanding mandates, the capricious will of your political masters, of which I am one from time to time, that you all have to deal with in the public sector and in the provision of public services, I really truly believe that there is no more important investment that any of us can make than learning to use social media and other technology to better reach out to citizens. Tall words, I know, but through the lens of some of the work that we are doing here in the City of Vancouver, including the Greenest City Action Plan aimed at making us the greenest city on earth by the year 2020, hoping to illustrate why it matters so much. Take you through, through these slides, I'm going to take you through our experience, what it's accomplished, and hopefully at the end we'll have some time for questions, and if there's enough time, we'll even have some time for answers. So first, and in the interests of open government, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about how I got here. I know Ajay gave you some of my title background, but this is a little section I like to call my brief history of disillusionment with Western civilization. So we often talk about Canada as a democracy, but in truth, we're on a road to democracy that, in my opinion, is not yet finished. Our ideal of democracy in Canada is not born out of the people-powered revolutions that the French or the Americans had, but rather out of a devolution of the monarchy, of power that was held in hereditary officials in the monarchy. The Westminster parliamentary system was not intended to be by, for, and of the people, but rather just check and balancing by the people as we did this devolution from a hereditary system to an elected system, and why we still have an appointed Senate. It's an artifact of the House of Lords, which was a way of devolving that hereditary power. So this devolution has moved faster or slower over the years, and in the United States, they've actually gone, you know, we come from this hereditary system, they come from this people-powered revolution, and somehow we've sort of met in the middle. And unfortunately, that devolution or revolution has gone faster or slower over the course of my lifetime, but one could argue that at some point it actually seems to have stopped moving altogether. So how do we get moving again? And in my opinion, anytime you're stuck in life, the best thing to do is just to go back to the basics, to think about why we're here at all. So our democracies are all founded on the principles that were developed through the Age of Reason. And one of the most basic of these, at the very dawn of the Age of Reason, was the concept of the consent of the governed, as a sort of juxtaposition against the divine right of kings. And this idea that you had to get in order to govern people and to make policy for them, even to provide services for them, if you get in sort of Tom Locke and the deep philosophical thinking, that to have the right to assist someone, you need their consent, which I know in healthcare is it's a sticky topic that has a lot of investigation into it. But at the democratic level, this idea that the consent of the governed is essential to your ability to govern is one of the few ideas, because reason itself seems not to have endured as far as this concept that is enshrined in law now. The Article 21 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that the will of the people shall be the basis of the authority of government, and that is true in all of our democracies across the world. But then it comes down to what is the consent of the governed. So we know that elections are one way that citizens can express their consent, but a very contemporary modern example here in British Columbia, the HST issue, tells us that an election alone is not enough for a major public policy change. So every time you bring forward a new policy, you need to go back and make sure that you have the consent of the people for whom you're making the policy. And the anti-HST campaign shows us that in the modern age, how quickly social media and technology can be used to organize the governed when they don't feel that they've given their consent. So that rises the question, how do you get 35,000 people into a room? Or in the case of Vancouver, 650,000, or whatever community that you come from. So in December 2008, I was elected to City Council along with Mayor Gregor Robertson on 4 major platform promises, one of which was to be the greenest city in the world. Engagement is not the only thing that has moved us forward on that. And I didn't want to walk away from this podium today with you thinking you could set up a Facebook page and launch yourselves on some major transformative policy change and be 100% successful in it because you had a Facebook page and Twitter. There are some basics behind everything that we do in policymaking, and I wanted to run through those first. I'm guessing, in fact, I'm quite certain you've already got them well under control on whatever issues you're working on, but just maybe think of it as a brief refresher course. So 3 essential ingredients before we even get to engagement. The first is leadership. I'm not going to speak long to it, but I will say as someone who's worked in environmental and social advocacy for 20 years, which is, yes, in my entire adult life and part of my pre-adult life, leadership really matters. It can't be one councillor or one MLA or one MP. It needs to be that MP or MLA needs to be the leader of the party and ideally the leader of government, and at the local level it needs to be your mayor who is 100% invested in whatever transformative change project you're on. If you're in an organization, it needs to be your CEO, it needs to be your president, it needs to be whoever is in that leadership position. But even when the leader says they want to do something, and I'm sure we've all heard leaders muse about the transformative change projects that they'd like an organization to embark on, the second key ingredient is a clear logical plan. And in the case of the Greenest City Action Team, or Action Plan, we established a team and they set out in 10 areas, 10 environmental policy areas, a very clear logical plan that had, and here's the very important key to this plan, measurable targets, because it's very important that those governed, the people whose consent you need, have a way to monitor your progress on it and to tell you, you tell them what you want to do, they tell you and can monitor whether or not you're successful in getting where you need to go. So in the case of the Greenest City Action Plan, we had these 10 policy areas. You can see them up on the screen. Each and every one of them has a measurable target, and those targets were rigorously check to make sure that there was a cost-effective way to be able to actually get the data that you need to monitor these things, because those targets don't mean anything if you can't record what a greenhouse gas emission is or can't record what the trips on foot, bicycle, and transit are. One of the targets, food, there at the bottom, the number 10, the original target was to decrease carbon emissions related to food by 33%. When we went out to public consultation and all that, what we found out is that nobody's really measuring how carbon emissions, what they are in food. There's some broad formulas that are used, but not very rigorous methodology, impossible to track and report back to the public on. So in the interest of citizen engagement and being accountable to the public, we went back and looked at how we could achieve the same outcome, but actually have a metric that was measurable within the budget and known data constraints that we were facing. So we came up with the concept of increasing food assets, which I would like to say was actually, it's really made us, that singular item has actually really made us think about how we talk to citizens, right? The concept of decreasing carbon emissions is nice, and some people certainly understand that. But the concept of increasing your food assets, which accomplishes exactly the same thing, is a much more generative process to go out and talk to citizens about, to go to them and say, how do you want to increase food assets in your community, as opposed to how do you want to decrease something, provides a lot more rich engagement and feedback opportunities for people. So those are 2 out of 3. The next one is action. So I'm just going to grab some water. So this, by far, leadership, essential, clear logical plan with measurable targets, essential, but in order to convince people that you're serious, because we can spend a lot of time at roundtables and in discussions and task force and working groups and committees and whatever it might be, if I had to credit one thing when I talked to people from other city governments about what really worked about the plan, this was it. People were absolutely sure that we were willing to act on this plan, which gave them a reason to engage with it, either because they were scared of what actions we might take, or because they felt that their commitment was going to be met by a commitment from government to do something. So when we launched the plan, even before we started the intensive public engagement, we had already started close to 40 actions, which were these quick starts. And by July 2011, when the plan came to council, we had initiated 84 separate green initiatives and projects. Some of them We're actually fairly small, but gained a lot of media attention. We put some separated bike lanes in the city of Vancouver. If you live in the English-speaking world, you've probably heard about that, so I won't dwell on it. Some of them were quite huge, attracting over $300 million new dollars in investment into green industries in the city of Vancouver. Some should not have been huge, but ended up being re-engineering the engineering system about how we pick up garbage. Turns out to be engineers are there any engineers here? No, okay. They are fabulous problem solvers. The challenge is convincing them there's a problem, and we have a waste system that has worked a particular way for 100 years, and that's all been fine. Getting them to remove food from the waste stream and put it into a separate stream, which is a major source of carbon emissions in the city of Vancouver, as well as it's just dumb to be throwing away a recoverable resource that could be putting nutrients back into our fairly significant agricultural system here in the Lower Mainland. So that turned out to be one of the hardest things I've ever done, and some were just sort of crimes of opportunity. We had the Olympic Games, as many of you, all of you probably know. We were able through that, we sort of had to get people on transit, managed to become, behind Mexico City and New York City, the third largest transit system on the continent during the Games by sheer volume. That's not per capita. The cool thing, though, is that we've been able to retain about 25% of that new ridership, which is quite significant. And if you're wondering why there's all these debates about bus service and increasing demands for tax dollars to fund it, it's largely because of that increased ridership. We also have made major changes in building policy. We're now moving towards net zero carbon buildings so that they will actually produce more energy than they consume, which is an incredible technical feat, but very critical if we're going to meet any of our green goals. And of course, we know people will keep driving, and there's always something new on the horizon, so we have to try and build ahead. So things like electric vehicles. We're the first city, the first Canadian city to require all new houses and developments to have plug-ins for electric vehicles, and we just signed a deal with the province and the feds to put in 80 new public space available electric vehicles. So all to say that if we're inviting you to an engagement to come and talk to us about this, you're pretty sure that we're serious about what we're doing, and we're going to keep doing that. And that's an important lesson when you're doing engagement that often ends up in these coil ring books that end up on somebody's shelves and nobody ever knows where it goes. So the key piece here that I was asked to come speak to you today is about that piece. So how do you engage people? 3 critical sectors that we engaged. The first was internal, going back to that concept of the consent of the governed. Well, there's also the consent of the people who actually do the work, which is the staff in any organization. So each of the 10 areas that you saw up on the screen, we had internal engagement groups that we did through a variety of social media, in-person meetings, very heavily engaged in informing the process moving forward. We also created 10 mirror groups for external advisory committees with academics, nonprofit, Vancouver Coastal Health was heavily engaged in some of our committees, business community, and labor. So we had a structure that looked like this, with Greenest City in the middle. The staff groups are the green ones on the outside, and then the external advisory committees there. So just there, we have over 500 champions in all of those groups, either internal staff or external advisory committees that can spread the message of the Greenest City throughout the community and engage their own communities while at the same time feeling like they are critical champions within the process. Which brings me to the third piece, which is the public engagement piece. So, when we first started the Greenest City Action Team, it was February 2009. I had been elected for, I'm going to guess, about 4 weeks at City Hall at that point, which works quite differently than school board. I set up a Facebook account called the Greenest City Action Team. This is one of 2 very strange things that happened on the same day. Being a new councillor, I decided I might tell someone about this. It occurred to me I'd never seen a Facebook account for the city. There probably was one. Of course there was one, because who didn't have a Facebook account? So I went and talked to the Director of Communications and said, just wanted to let you know, FYI, set up this account, just so you know. I had already managed to cause a few little kerfluffles. I put my own pictures up on my wall in my office. I rearranged my furniture. I didn't want a desktop computer. I only wanted a laptop. Anyway, there'd been a few moments, but this set off every alarm bell in City Hall. Within an hour, I was in the city manager's office, who I'd never met at that point, 4 weeks into city council. In the city manager's office with directors, this meeting probably cost $5,000 of staff time to discuss the Facebook account. And it started with what is Facebook, went on to why the heck would we want that? And at some point in the meeting, there was a culmination of someone saying, well, what if somebody posts on the wall? And I said, well, actually, that's kind of why we would set it up in the first place, and realizing how large this culture gap was that we had to go through. The second, I did continue with it because, as you know, the councillor or elected official is always right, and they found a way. I promised to monitor it. And as it happened, my fear, which I told to them, is what if somebody doesn't post to it? That's the bigger risk for us as an organization, which didn't necessarily come to pass, but I'll get back to it. The second thing that happened that day, actually before I set up the Facebook account, I was on my way back from the first Greenest City Action Team meeting, and we were in the boardroom at Van City down by Main Street SkyTrain station, and this peregrine falcon showed up on the railing of the deck outside of the meeting. Peregrine falcons, for those that don't know, were one of the first canaries in the environmental coal mine. Their eggs are susceptible to DDT. It softens the shells, and as a result of that, DDT was heavily used throughout North America in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And as a result of that, the peregrine falcon was actually extirpated from large parts of North America and quite endangered in the parts where it was remaining. The banning of DDT through the dedicated work of advocates, healthcare professionals, elected officials, and reestablishing some of their habitat, because as their numbers fell, their habitat started to get wiped out because there was nothing there to save it for. In 1999, the U.S. finally took it off the endangered species list. That's how successful the peregrine's reintegration has been. So, how amazing was it? And it just was sitting there. It's a juvenile peregrine falcon in the middle of, well, close to downtown Vancouver, checking us out. And what gave me, as we were sitting in the Facebook meeting, what made me think, this is worth doing. Even if all I get out of this is why we can't do Facebook, it's worth doing it. As it happened, Facebook was a almost complete strikeout. I think we had a maximum on that page during the first year of 500 people, which is about the same number that we had in in-person meetings, as you heard earlier. But it was not without impact. From that humble beginning, big things grew. Within 1 year of that Facebook discussion, we launched our Greenest City formal engagement strategy. We were going to do a pachachka. Does anyone know what pachachka is? Like 20 slides, 20 seconds. Very engaging, probably more so than a half an hour keynote at the end of a day. But it's a great thing to get lots of ideas moving quickly. So we launched it. The group that was putting it on needed to charge $10 because they're a not-for-profit, and that's how they cover their costs. We said, well, you want us to launch an engagement by charging $10 per person to come talk to us about policy? Like, that's not going to happen. So we said, we'll try it. So the first venue sold out within the first day as a result of that Facebook page and the people that were engaged there, as well as the advisory committees. We went up a venue, and about a week later, that venue sold out. Then we went up another venue to 800 people, and that venue sold out. And in the end, we put it in the Orpheum because we couldn't get BC Place. They were redoing the roof, and that's where we could fit people. We had 2,000 people there, and we had a waiting list of over 1,000 people, all paying to come and talk to us about public policy in the city of Vancouver. Importantly, the hardest thing about that whole day actually was trying to get people back into their seats after intermission. People were so engaged. And all of that wouldn't have mattered at all if we wouldn't have had these computers there to collect information from them about how to get back in touch with them. We got them to go onto the Talk Green to Us website and register there. We had people with clipboards. We got addresses. We gave them stickers. We gave them buttons, because those 2,000, just like that 500 plus another couple hundred on Facebook became 3,000, we needed that 3,000 to become 5, 10, 50, whatever number of thousands, so that we could continue to talk to people. We invited them to all sorts of events and invited their friends. This is a dinner we had outside at Burrard and Davie in the community garden there. Fantastic event. Anytime you get food and people together, it is an amazing experience. And they all went home and tweeted about it and Facebooked about it and talked to their friends about it and invited them to other events. We had an unconference where we actually let people design the day. They come to the conference, they get to build their own agenda, and you vote with your feet about what you're interested in, which is absolutely critical information for public policy makers to know. And ultimately, we wanted them all to go to this website. That was the main goal of all of this, was to get them to this one website where we posted the ideas that had come from our Greenest City Action team, the experts, the ideas that had come from the 500 people on the internal and external advisory committees, the ideas that came from the Pachachkas and the Alfrescos and everywhere. And what was very cool about it is they all sat alongside each other. You had no idea whether this was David Suzuki's idea, who was one of our expert panel members, or whether it was a guy who happened to stumble into a community dinner at Burrard and Davie. And even cooler, you got to vote on it. Like, how could you imagine the revolution in public policy making if you could put things up on a website, your idea alongside whoever's idea, and get people to vote? I appreciate there's problems with that, and something perhaps we can address in questions and answers about the organized and the unorganized, the connected and the disconnected. But for this over 18-month period, which also included a great deal of multicultural outreach, low-income outreach, seniors, to try and make sure anyone that might be on the other side of the digital divide wasn't lost, ultimately all got put together to inform the work that we were doing moving forward. So at the end of the day, when we passed this plan unanimously at City Council, in July 2011, a 172-page plan covering 10 years of action across 10 policy areas that will make us the greenest city on earth. Over 35,000 people had been engaged in the process. 9,000 were considered deeply engaged, so gave up days, weeks, in some cases months of time to be able to be involved. We had over 1 million people exposed to the greenest city, either through the website, word of mouth, Facebook, Twitter, newspaper advertisements. And we've had more than 1,600 cities around the world inquire about the work that we've done on greenest cities. So it's not just Vancouver that we're changing, but it's actually spreading across the world, which is a really humbling thing when you sit down to do what you think is a relatively ambitious, but discrete policy change in the world. And the success of Greenest City is no longer just about having a city of 650,000 people heavily invested in mass transformative change, but also about changing how we talk about change together. So I am going to leave it, oh, here we go. Sorry, I forgot my meaningful, effective action plan, which was really the goal of all of this work that we were doing. The race to social media success at City Hall is really on. Since we launched, since that first $5,000 meeting in the city manager's boardroom about what if they post on it, this is a grid of all of the social media accounts we have at the city, and collectively they have about 50,000 people engaged in them. So I will leave it with you, and I think you have all the tools that you need after being here today about how you're going to get 35,000 people in the room. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea, for showing why I chose you. People are probably wondering, why are we getting a city councillor talking about healthcare and engagement? So that's pretty powerful to get 1 million people and 1,600 cities following you and seeing what's happening. So something we can think on and reflect on in healthcare. So let's open it up to questions. We have about 10 minutes. That gives us, an appetite with Andrea. She's her brain is full of a lot of great ideas for your work that you're doing, either at your health authority or with your organization. And I have the mic, if anyone wants it. Oh, maybe Luke. I think you stunned them, Andrea.
It's late. It's late in the day too, I know.
Very nice presentation, Andrea. I wanted to know, because some of us work in government, and getting buy-in, as they call it, is a huge challenge. And I can so relate, not that I can't put pictures on my wall, but it shows that there's so much, to overcome. How would you say we could kind of get onto what you discovered was a secret, or not a trick, but, helped you make the way?
Well, the data.vancouver.ca is up there for a reason, although you'll notice I didn't mention it in my in my talk, but I always tell people, because I think it's a true statement, the very first thing you can do is release any data that is releasable. And I know in healthcare that is a provocative statement, but consider, you know where the hospitals are, just release a data file that says, you know, it's a Excel spreadsheet that says, here are where the hospitals are, right? And why do that? Well, because you force and provoke a discussion about the nature of the information sharing that you're doing with the public. And none of this can happen. We did the open government policy in Vancouver concurrently with Green a City, because you cannot meaningfully engage with the public if you have a level of literacy about an issue that you're not willing to extend to them or not able to extend to them. So I would not expect the public to engage in treatment discussions, because you'll notice my literacy with healthcare is a little bit low, but you know, I trust my doctor can make a decision. Let's put it that way. I'm not going to engage or consult my doctor on the best way to treat me. I just want to know, based on the 20 years of experience and 15 years of schooling they've had, how that's going to go, right? But as to where a hospital should be located, we can absolutely have that discussion. But it requires me as a citizen having as much information as you as a decision maker have when you're considering all the different factors that come together. So, ergo, start at the beginning, which is starting to release information. Provoke that discussion around freedom of information and privacy acts, and how are you going to manage the flow of information so that when you get to the point that you're ready to have that discussion, it can happen. I know the really big government consultation right now in healthcare is the whole BC Healthy Families piece that's moving forward. Yeah, so I would think specifically about data that would help inform that. As a municipal government, we're very keen and excited about it, but we end up feeling defensive and reactive if we don't have access to the information. And citizens feel exactly the same way in that one-on-one discussion. Yeah.
Andrea, hi. I want to ask a tiny question here, and maybe it's because I'm middle-aged. I see there's an interesting irony between the tension between these extraordinary electronic media that we have to communicate about returning to the earth and returning to the ground and returning to green. And so I wonder, you know, what that tension or that shift back and forth between the different generations, between hearkening to what is deep within, obviously, those folks who have come from farming backgrounds and have a sense of what it's been like to be producing, and then trying to elicit, and bring that out from the generations that haven't had that same opportunity to feel the earth and to till the soil.
Yeah, no, it is. It's an interesting juxtaposition, right, of this incredibly wired, connected generation that's coming up right now that craves nothing more than community and FaceTime and nurturing something in the soil, growing something, producing something for the world that's healthy and valuable and of use. Like that yearning, the whole Occupy movement and that meme is a lot about that, right? It's about how do we get together. Interestingly, it's all happening in this in bits and bytes, right? Like it's this electronic tide that's sort of swamping with information and connectivity to try and get us in rooms together or outside together. I guess I would say there's a there's a phrase. I actually lived on the streets for 6 years in my teens and did a job training program as part of my long pathway off the streets. And in my file, I remember they wrote high tolerance for ambiguity. And I, at the time, thought, I never went to university. And I mean, obviously, I have vocabulary, but did not know quite what to make of the high tolerance for ambiguity.
Just so you know, that's as good as works well under constant supervision.
Right. But I actually now have that phrase in my head all the time. The governments that are successful, the individuals that are successful in the job market, the governments that are successful in meeting the challenges of shrinking resources, heightened challenges, the countries, the whatevers, are going to be those that have a high tolerance for ambiguity. Like we are living in a non-linear time where we're going to have those juxtapositions, right? Where you're going to be out in the garden, which I am, with my iPhone tweeting while growing with my kid who has things I've never even heard of before that she's wired into, right? So as long as we can accept and tolerate that ambiguity and call crap on it when it's exploiting our tolerance for the ambiguity, and that's part of the challenge, then I think we'll be okay as we transition through.
Andrea, sorry, right at the very back here. You may have walked into a little bit of a landmine with your comment about patients and physicians, because the social media revolution's getting a little bit more widespread than I think you realize in healthcare, that with good reason there are patients who now feel very justified in discussing or sometimes challenging their doctor around the diagnosis and course of treatment. And there's a lot of things going on where the doctors and patients are working a lot more closely together, sort of driven by social media. And the whole area around chronic diseases, that even within academic medicine, the view of the patient is seen as critical, because the subjective perspective on how they're doing is becoming very important. So the paradigm, because of social media, I think there's a lot of people here that believe it's changing fundamentally. So the sort of the revolution that social media is fueling around citizen engagement is becoming quite embedded in healthcare as well, I think.
Interesting. Okay, well, that is interesting. I probably should disclose it was it was definitely disingenuous of me to suggest I wouldn't question, because right along with the high tolerance for ambiguity is questions authority. So doctors are... Yeah. So, but you know, I guess it goes, like, to go back to this basics concept. You can engage with anyone, assuming you have a level playing field of power and information, right? So as an elected official, part of my job is to try and level the information, but also the power playing field for people. In my opinion, it's part of my job. As a physician, I would guess there's lots of people who have both the intellectual competency and, thanks to the internet, the access to the information they need to be able to analyze that information to meaningfully participate in their diagnosis and their treatment course. That being said, I guess it would depend on the technical complexity. Like, you just go back to the principle, right? There's another counselor who will remain nameless. It drives this person completely nuts that I Google up health conditions and stuff, and they say, well, you're not a doctor. No. But it's a very old paradigm, right? The doctoring by Google, I know, can probably drive doctors and other healthcare professionals nuts, but as someone who likes to be engaged in the world around me, I love my doctor to pieces and have never questioned, but I could, right? And that's sort of the point if I wanted to.
So Andrea, I was going to just ask and jump in here for a quick second. So we have a 3-day conference, right? So 2 more days are on quality improvement metrics. So how do we look at the data, look at the system, and how do we improve the system to improve better care? So the things that you've talked about at the city level, you're trying to make it more green. What kind of reflections would you have around, the concept that we've heard throughout the day and we know throughout our work is do more with less. Whether we use that and argue that, that's different, but I think something like that would be interesting, because I think at the city level, you probably feel it as well. I wondered what kind of reflections do you have for that?
Yeah, the do more with less is a meme across government. It's some business for sure, but I think it's a meme we feel very keenly in our own houses, right? Like, that's where the rubber has really hit the road for a lot of people. We're actually much better at it than we think we are, but the more, so, if you live by yourself or with a family, you're doing more with less, most likely. You would be bucking a statistical average if you're not. But then when you think about an institution you're involved with doing more with less, it feels scary and impossible, even though somehow at home you do it. And the reason you do it, this is my hypothesis, is because you're in a connected community, right? When you have more to do and less resources to do with, you reach out and bring in your husband, your wife, your parents, your brother, your kid, whatever it is that you need to do, or other people living on your block or apartment building or whatever. Institutionally, it's pretty siloed, right? Like when new stuff comes in, it's like a plastic bag and the water keeps pouring in, and at some point it feels like it's going to burst, right? Why not grab another plastic bag or another bucket to be able to, sorry, plastic bags are probably not the right thing to be talking about right now. Bucket, reusable bucket, to be able to fit it into. So I think Vancouver has this incredible thing that happened. And, you know, I was one of the organizers. I was a co-chair of the no side of the referendum on the Olympics, whether we should have the Olympics here. So I'm not an Olympics booster. I see the benefits, but I also saw the cons of it. But one of the benefits I would never have guessed, and I know we didn't really account for, the Olympics are going to happen no matter what policy. Healthy families may or may not happen, right, depending on a whole bunch of factors outside of most of our control. The Olympics were going to happen, and there's no point in Vancouver being embarrassed during, well, 10,000 international media are here and 1 billion people around the planet. So people came together in a way that you would never imagine in government. To watch people come across departments, we had the director of planning working with a fairly low-level engineer alongside with the animal control bylaw officer doing the protocol hosting for the president of Norway, for example. So, you know, you can't buy that kind of employee engagement experience. And as a result of the connections that were made during the Olympics, we learned that we work better across. We actually are better as a whole when we break down those silos and work across department. And there were relationships made that endure to this day. So you get these really innovative, creative projects that are just because Bob over here and Jill over there happen to meet each other on the mag and bag line at the Olympics, right? And they want to keep working together. So if you can find ways to reach out beyond your area, develop those relationships and that trust, that's what's going to make you most resilient as an organization, regardless of whether it's less resources or an earthquake or whatever it is that we have to deal with collectively as a challenge moving forward. Thanks. Okay.
Kevin, how's Twitter? Is there any questions on Twitter? No? Okay. We'll go back to the room. Well, why don't we do one more question? Or a reflection for Andrea or for the room? We'll take time, don't worry. I want one more.
It's all good. You can tweet me, email me, Facebook me when you're clear of head. I'm actually an afternoon, evening person, so this is the part in the conference where I'm just sort of getting going. That's why I don't do morning keynotes in case you ever want me to come back. Yeah.
No, it's fine. I mean, the thing for me then, what would be to challenge everyone. So if the city of Vancouver can engage the public around looking at what their priority areas are, how as we as people in health authorities and in organizations within health systems do that internally with our staff at our wards or at our primary care units, and also engage the public in the same way. If Andrea took that risk of taking some photos of the Falcon and then doing some stuff on Facebook and then seeing that grow, how do we do something similar within our own resources and our own systems? Or what are the big challenges from that? So we're hearing a lot of that from the first morning panel. How do we do that? And is that something we want to do? And, how do we move that forward in BC as champions in quality improvement and areas of healthcare improvement? But yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest challenge I'm hearing from Andrea is like, hey, we've done it. We just started with a pilot and it went pretty well. So how can we in BC do the same thing with these tools? And from the workshops you've heard like video and gaming and analytics and, just different tools. Any reflections on that? Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm with Vancouver Coastal Health. My name is Jody. Thanks. I would love to know how, from a health authority perspective, we could bring 2,000 people into a room and charge them $10 each. Frankly, I don't think we can get away with that. I'd love it if the next time you do it, if you could ask some health questions so that we could get better bang for your buck. I'm being a little bit flippant in that, deliberately so, but actually I think the answer might be these partnerships. I mean, Vancouver Coastal Health, the City of Vancouver is part of Vancouver Coastal Health and vice versa, so I think that these opportunities for shared dialogue that resonate around the theme of health, healthy city, fit city, and health agendas, I'd love to be exploring those more, because I think that's how we can further our agenda for public engagement as well. And yeah, and there we are, right?
Yeah.
So thank you.
I can guarantee you that Vancouver Coastal Health was a partner in inviting people to there. Although it wasn't so formal, right? Like it was very relationship based. There was a policy we asked. I think Vancouver Coastal Health sits on local food, I think clean air and water. And I think there's even one more that's not. So the lighter footprint, I think, is the other one on there. We've got people from the Building Owners and Managers Association to, oh God, I could go on. There's like 200 different organizations that we're partnered with through this structure. So they are the ones actually that have the list. The city doesn't have a contact list, does not have an email list. Still to this day, we do not have an email list to contact people with. We're building it slowly, but it is an alien concept for government, right? So when we partner with community organizations, we are able to do that outreach and get people in the door.
We appreciate it. Is what I'm getting at.
And we'd love to do more partnerships. Yeah, no, the charging $10 to ask your opinion was I really didn't think we were going to get away with that, but it worked great. Worked awesome. And it was then cost recovery. We didn't make money off the event. It was a cost recovery event. So.